What if the biggest political scandal in modern American history was never actually about Russia? What if everything you were told, the headlines, the investigations, the breathless cable news coverage that consumed this country for years, what if all of it was built on a lie? Not a mistake, not a misread of the intelligence, a deliberate, premeditated lie, planned inside a presidential campaign, briefed to a sitting president of the United States, and then hidden from the American people for nearly a decade. Because that's not a conspiracy theory anymore. That's what the documents show. That's what the declassified intelligence reveals. And that's exactly what we're going to walk through today. Clearly, carefully, and completely. If you follow American politics, you've lived through the Russia collusion era. It started in 2016. It dominated every news cycle for years. It launched a special counsel investigation that cost tens of millions of dollars, and it split the country in half. The word collusion became a household term. Russia became the explanation for everything, and Donald Trump became, in the eyes of a large portion of the media and the political establishment, a foreign agent sitting inside the Oval Office. But here's what they never told you. From the very beginning, before the Steele dossier became public, before Robert Mueller was appointed, before a single congressional hearing was held, the people pushing this story already knew it wasn't true. The intelligence community had intercepted communications. They had briefed the president. They knew where this narrative actually came from, and they chose to push it anyway. Today, in 2025, we are finally getting the full picture. Classified documents are being declassified. Criminal referrals have been made. A DOJ Strike Force has been formed. And the names at the center of this, names you know very well, are now being looked at in a completely different light. This isn't about relitigating old arguments. This is about understanding what actually happened, who was responsible, and whether anyone is going to be held accountable for it. It's August 2016. The presidential race is in full swing. Donald Trump has secured the Republican nomination and is running against Hillary Clinton. The general election is 3 months away. And inside the American intelligence community, something extraordinary is happening. U.S. intelligence has intercepted a Russian intelligence communication, and what that intercept reveals changes everything. Russian intelligence is aware of a plan originating from the Hillary Clinton campaign to falsely accuse Donald Trump of colluding with Russia to manufacture a scandal, to tie him to the Kremlin with a story that had no factual basis and bury his candidacy under an avalanche of innuendo and suspicion. This intelligence is so significant, so sensitive, that CIA Director John Brennan doesn't just write a memo. He takes it directly to the top. He personally briefs President Barack Obama. He briefs Vice President Joe Biden. He briefs Director of National Intelligence James Clapper and FBI Director James Comey. The entire national security leadership of the United States government is in that room. They are all told, directly, what the intelligence shows, that Hillary Clinton has approved a plan to smear Donald Trump with a fabricated Russia story. John Brennan even takes handwritten notes during that briefing. Notes that still exist. Notes that were eventually found and declassified. And those notes, in Brennan's own handwriting, contain a phrase that says everything. Russia is aware of the Hillary Clinton plan to tie Donald Trump to a Russia story. Now, let that sink in for a moment. The CIA director sits down with the President of the United States and tells him that the Russia collusion narrative, the one that is about to consume the next several years of American political life, is a Clinton campaign operation. Everyone in that room knows, and yet, not one of those men ever said a single public word about it. Not in press conferences. Not in interviews. Not in sworn congressional testimony. Not one single time. Here's something that almost never gets discussed in mainstream coverage of this story. Before all of this, before the Steele dossier became the centerpiece of the Russia narrative, the intelligence community had already conducted an assessment. And that original assessment, the one prepared by career intelligence professionals, looking at the actual available evidence, found no direct information, no direct evidence that Vladimir Putin wanted to help elect Donald Trump in 2016. That was the real intelligence community conclusion. That's what the professionals found when they looked at the data. And that conclusion was listed repeatedly in the presidential daily brief, the highly classified document that lands on the president's desk every single morning, summarizing the most critical intelligence facing the country. But then Donald Trump won the election in November 2016, and something changed. President Obama ordered a new intelligence assessment. And this time, the assignment wasn't to find out whether Russia had interfered. It was to detail how Moscow had affected the outcome of an election that had already happened. Not if, how. The conclusion was baked in before a single analyst sat down to write it. The directive was to produce a document that said, definitively, that Russia had influenced the election in Trump's favor. That report was published in January 2017, in the final weeks of the Obama administration. It became the foundational document for everything that followed the Mueller investigation. The congressional hearings, the years of media coverage, the entire Russia collusion era was built on top of an assessment that directly contradicted what the original intelligence actually showed. We know all of this now because in 2025, DNI Tulsi Gabbard declassified the House Intelligence Committee report prepared in 2020, a report based on a years-long investigation led by then-Congressman Devin Nunes. That report makes the contradiction explicit. The original assessment found no evidence that Putin wanted Trump to win. The January 2017 report said the opposite. And the reason for that reversal was a political directive, not new intelligence. Once the narrative was in motion, the cover-up became just as important as the original deception. And the cover-up was carried out in plain sight, hiding behind the credibility of institutions the American people trusted. The House Intelligence Committee, under Devin Nunes, called more than 70 witnesses. 70. These weren't random people. These were former ambassadors, senior State Department officials, Justice Department leadership, intelligence community officials, the people who actually would have seen any real evidence of Trump-Russia collusion if it existed. And every single one of them was asked the same three questions. What evidence do you have of Russian collusion with Donald Trump or his campaign? What evidence do you have of a conspiracy? What evidence do you have of coordination? And they batted 1,000. Every one of them said the same thing. We don't have any. Susan Rice said it. Samantha Power said it. Senior DOJ officials said it. The people closest to the actual intelligence and law enforcement decisions all confirmed, under oath, behind closed doors, there was no evidence. And those transcripts were classified and kept from the public for years. Meanwhile, on television, the same officials were going on camera and telling a completely different story. Clapper, Brennan, Comey, they were giving interview after interview, hour after hour, implying or outright stating that Trump had worked with Russia to steal the election. They gave this testimony to the public, knowing, based on their own sworn statements in classified settings, that no such evidence existed. It wasn't until October 2020, 4 years after that August 2016 briefing, that then DNI John Ratcliffe conducted an exhaustive search of classified materials and found Brennan's handwritten notes, found the underlying intelligence, found the paper trail that showed exactly what had happened and when. The truth had been classified and buried for 4 years. And the people who held the truth had spent those 4 years feeding the American public the exact opposite story. And then the 2020 election happened. The Hunter Biden laptop story broke, a story with real, verified, documented evidence of potential corruption, and it was immediately labeled Russian disinformation by the same intelligence officials, using the same playbook. 51 former intelligence officials signed a letter saying the laptop had the hallmarks of a Russian operation. No evidence, just a signature and a credential being weaponized to suppress a story before an election, and it worked. Joe Biden won, and the cover continued for 4 more years. So where does this leave us right now, in 2025? The answer is, in genuinely uncharted territory. Because what is being alleged here, and what the declassified intelligence appears to support, isn't just political misconduct. It's a coordinated conspiracy by senior government officials to deceive the American public, manipulate federal law enforcement and intelligence agencies, and undermine a sitting president with a story they knew was false. Criminal referrals have now been submitted to the Department of Justice by both DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, and CIA Director John Ratcliffe. Attorney General Pam Bondi has formed a dedicated strike force specifically to evaluate this evidence. And the Durham Report's Classified Annex, a document containing the underlying intelligence that Ratcliffe has spent months reviewing and preparing for declassification, is expected to be released soon. That annex is described by those who have seen it as explosive. It reportedly shows not just that the Clinton campaign invented this story, but that elements of the FBI actively worked to amplify the lie and bury the truth. Now, a lot of people are asking the obvious question, isn't it too late? Haven't the statutes of limitations run out? And for some of the earliest acts, yes, they may have. But here is the critical legal principle that changes the calculation entirely. In a conspiracy charge, the statute of limitations does not begin to run from the first act. It begins to run from the last act, in furtherance of that conspiracy. And the argument being made by officials like Ratcliffe is that this conspiracy never stopped. The people involved are still refusing to acknowledge what they did. They are still, to this day, defending the Russia narrative, attacking anyone who challenges it, and working to keep the full truth from coming out. If that argument holds legally, the clock may still be running, and the testimony window is also more recent than many people realize. John Brennan testified before the House Oversight Committee in 2022. Hillary Clinton testified under oath before John Durham's investigation in 2022. James Comey appeared before the Senate Judiciary Committee in September 2020. All of that testimony is now being compared against the underlying intelligence that is being declassified. And according to those with direct knowledge of both, the inconsistencies are significant. In some cases, the sworn testimony directly contradicts what the classified intelligence shows. The words being used publicly now by senior officials, treason, conspiracy, fraud on the American people, are not being used carelessly. They are being used by people who have read the classified material and are making a deliberate choice about how to characterize what they found. Whether that language ultimately translates into indictments, into prosecutions, into convictions, that remains to be seen. But the framing of this moment, coming from the director of the CIA and the director of national intelligence, is not ambiguous. There's one more dimension to this story that doesn't get enough attention. And it might be the most important one. Because beyond the destroyed reputations, beyond the constitutional damage, beyond the erosion of trust in our institutions, the Russia hoax had real-world national security consequences. It diverted the attention, the energy, and the resources of the most powerful government on earth away from actual threats. While Washington spent years screaming Russia, 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 China was moving, quietly, strategically, patiently. They were buying influence, acquiring technology, building military capability, and embedding themselves so deeply into the American supply chain that today, 90% of the prescription drugs that Americans take are manufactured in China. That didn't happen overnight. It happened because the political class was too consumed by a manufactured domestic crisis to pay attention to a real foreign one. And it wasn't just China. Iran accelerated its nuclear program during those years. Russia invaded Ukraine. Fentanyl started flowing across the southern border at catastrophic scale. The threats that actually endangered American lives and American interests were being actively ignored by people who were supposed to be protecting the country, but who were instead running political operations against a president they didn't like. That is the true cost of what was done here. It wasn't just unfair to Donald Trump. It wasn't just a political dirty trick that got out of hand. It was a dereliction of duty by people in positions of enormous responsibility, who put their political interests ahead of the national interest, and who left the country more vulnerable as a result. Here's where we are. The Durham Report's classified annex is expected to drop soon, and when it does, it is reportedly going to show, in documented, intelligence-backed detail, exactly how the FBI became an accelerant to this conspiracy. Not just a passive participant, but an active one, pouring fuel on a fire they knew was lit by a political campaign, while simultaneously burying the evidence that would have exposed the whole operation. Now, I want to be direct with you about something. The road to actual accountability for something this big, this deeply embedded in the institutions of power, is not a straight line. There will be legal battles. There will be people who fight this every step of the way. There will be media outlets that continue to defend the narrative rather than honestly reckon with what the evidence shows. That's going to be frustrating. It already is. But here's what is no longer in dispute. The American people were systematically deceived at the highest levels of government by people who took oaths to protect this country and used the power of those oaths to serve their own political agenda instead. The intelligence existed. The briefings happened. The notes were taken. The witnesses testified. And for nearly a decade, the people responsible for telling the truth chose not to. That is now on the record in declassified documents for anyone willing to look. And the reason that matters, the reason we keep covering this, even when it's exhausting, even when people say move on, even when the mainstream narrative tries to dismiss it, is because if this is allowed to happen once, without consequence, it will happen again. The same playbook, the same institutions, the same tactics, maybe against a different candidate, in a different election, for a different political purpose. The only way to prevent that is to understand fully what was done, who did it, and to make sure the full truth is part of the permanent historical record. That's why this channel exists. That's why this video exists. And that's why, if you found this breakdown useful, I'd ask you to share it with someone who needs to hear it, not because it's politically convenient, but because it's true. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. And if you're new here, subscribe, because this story is not finished. We will keep following it wherever it leads.